Hi everybody, this is Care Pastor Dave, and I'm in my kitchen with my granddaughter Josephine. Say hi, Josephine.
Hi, Josephine.
Okay, today we're going to do a little experiment, and it involves a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag, and a pitcher of water. Josephine, would you take the water, please?
Wait, what? I take
And
this?
pour that water into the bag. Carefully.
Yeah, you were shaking.
Very good. You can put the pitcher up, and now let's zip the bag shut, please. Yeah, there you go.
You have it in
All
your
right.
hands.
Now, science tells us that this bag is made of polymer plastic. And what that means is, one of the characteristics of polymers is that they bind to other substances. So according to the science, I can poke this pencil through this bag of water all the way through, and it will not leak because the polymers will bind to the pencil. Do you believe that?
No.
All right, let's test it. Let's see what happens.
Don't need it over
You
the
ready?
bowl?
Okay, let's hold it over a bowl in case it leaks. You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
What?
Look at that.
Oh.
No leak. Wow.
Pull it out. It's
Do you
gonna
believe
leak.
it now?
Yeah. No. I don't know.
No? All right, let's try it again. Let's try a second pencil. Ready? Still doesn't leak. How about that? Now do you believe it'll work?
Yeah.
Good. Let's test your belief. I'm going to hold it
No.
over your head.
No.
And-
No.
Good morning. So what you have seen on the screen is a demonstration of a lack of trust. You know, Josephine said, I've seen it done. I believe in the science. I saw it done twice. I think it's gonna hold. The bag won't leak. And she believed that, but she wasn't willing to let me do it by holding it over her head. You see, what she was lacking was trust and faith, rather. Let me give you a simple definition of faith. Faith is trusting what you believe enough to act upon it. Faith isn't what you believe. Faith is what you do because you believe. And when you believe something enough to trust it and act upon it, that's faith. So this picture is not a picture of trust and faith. No. She believed it, but she didn't trust her belief enough to actually act upon it. So we're going to talk today about trust, and we're going to talk specifically about misplaced trust. Because in a way, she's pretty smart, because there's a good chance that eventually you're going to stick enough pencils in that bag that it's going to burst, right? So she's kind of wise maybe not to trust that wholly, because it's not, that would be a misplaced trust. Another example, helicopters. They fly, right? They're safe. You know they fly. My wife, she loves helicopters. Not. She knows that they can fly, and more importantly, she knows that they can land and not kill everybody on board when they do so. But you will never catch my wife in a helicopter. It's not because of a lack of belief, it's just a lack of faith. You know, she's not willing to put her trust in that helicopter, and that's, again, a wise thing, because every once in a while the helicopter crashes, right? I can guarantee you this. Next time you read about a helicopter that's crashed, Debbie will not be on it. I promise you that. She will not be on it. But we do that all the time. We place our trust in things that may not be fully trustworthy. Every one of you came in here this morning. You sat down on that chair in faith that it would hold you up. But you know, sometimes the chair breaks. We walk into a dark room, we flip the switch, we know that the light is going to come on, but sometimes it doesn't, right? So the question is, where can I place my trust? And that it will not ever fail me. Sometimes we put faith and trust in people and we get disappointed. So who can I place my trust in and know that he will never fail me? You know the answer to that? Anybody? This is, okay, God, right. This is the part where you respond, right? That's what Joe Scruggs would say. This is the part where you respond. God is the one and only person that you can place your total faith in and trust in and know that he will never, ever fail you. But we tend to put our faith in all sorts of stuff that does fail us. We tend to place our trust in the wrong thing. So we're going to look at the story of David today in 1 Chronicles 21. And we're going to talk about misplaced trust, which is kind of strange to me because David spent his whole life learning to trust the Lord, right? He spent his whole life from as a boy, as a very young man. He stood on a field with a slingshot in one hand and a staff in the other, and he faced a giant knowing that God would give him victory. He had trust in the Lord, and he was validated in that trust. Before that happened, the prophet Samuel had come and anointed David and told him that he was going to be king over all of Israel. But you know, it took more than 20 years for that to come about. Imagine you get the promise when you're 17 or 18 years old, and you don't actually receive the promise until you're almost 40. But through that entire period, David trusted the Lord. There were times when he could have taken matters into his own hands, which we've seen in this summer series. Opportunities that he had to simply kill Saul and claim the kingship for himself, which was his right. God had anointed him as king. But David refused to act on his own. He refused to not trust God. He trusted God to act on his time and in his way. And he was validated in that trust. David went to battle many times, and sometimes he even asked for God's strategy, so get some advice from God on how to fight the battle. But every time he won. David won battle after battle after battle because he trusted in the Lord, not in his own ability and his own might. When he was ousted from the throne by his son Absalom, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, even as he was being accosted on the way, as he was running away from Jerusalem, David placed his trust in the Lord, knowing that God would work his will out. Whatever that was, David was willing to trust the Lord. And he became king again. He was validated in his trust. God will never leave you. He will never forsake you. That's his promise, right? And we can always count on the promise of God to be true and trustworthy. So even when David sinned, this great sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, did God leave him or forsake him? No. David turned to God in confession and repentance, trusted God to maintain and keep that relationship and renew that relationship. And that's exactly what happened. So after a lifetime of these kinds of events happening over and over and over again, David, you would think, would have learned to trust wholly in the Lord, right? So we come to 1 Chronicles 21. David's old, close to death. He's getting his stuff in order, getting ready to turn the kingdom over to his son Solomon. And we read what happens in chapter 21, starting with verse 1. It says, Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the troops, Go and count the Israelites from Beersheba to Dan, and then report back to me so that I may know how many there are. But Joab replied, May the Lord multiply his troops 100 times over. my lord the king, are they not all my lord's subjects? Why does my lord want to do this? Why should he bring guilt on Israel? The king's word, however, overruled Joab. So Joab left and went throughout Israel and then came back to Jerusalem. Before we get into the problem of misplaced trust, I have to deal with another problem that comes from a parallel passage in 2 Samuel 24:1. Same event, but a different description of it. In 2 Samuel 24:1 it says, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, go and take a census of Israel and Judah. Chronicles says Satan did it, and Samuel says God did it. To answer your question, I'm going to call Dave Brown up to the stage. And this raises a couple of obvious questions, right? First of all, to me, the question is, why was God angry with Israel? What did Israel do to cause the Lord's anger to burn against them? And I have a really simple answer for you. You ready? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But the second question is a lot more important, I think. And that is, who incited David to take the census? In the one case in Chronicles, it's Satan. In the other case, in 2 Samuel, it's God. Well, I would remind you of something that Pastor Adam taught us several weeks ago from James 1:13. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. That passage goes on to say that the temptation comes from our own desires. And those desires conceive in us, and sin is born in us. That's not from God. But as Pastor Adam reminded us, God does not tempt us, but he does test us. And perhaps God was acting to test David. For whatever reason, in his anger against Israel, he wanted to see how David would respond. And like Job, David, as a follower and believer in God and trusting in God, Satan could not come and tempt David without God's permission. So perhaps God gave Satan permission in a way to tempt David so that he would be tested. That's one possible explanation. There are several others, which I would be happy to discuss at a later date. If you want to talk about them, just give me a call. That's something I learned from Pastor Dave a few weeks ago, too. If you don't want to deal with a controversial passage, just say, call me and we'll talk about it. For now, let's dig into the story a little bit. Let's talk about misplaced trust. What is the problem with counting the people? And he's actually counting those who would be available for military service. As we read on through the passage, Joab spends several months going through the land and counting, and he comes back with a pretty good figure, 1.15 million men who are ready to take up arms if the need arises. So he's got a pretty good army available if he needs it. What's wrong with knowing that? What's wrong with counting those men? Well, let me share with you what David himself said when he was younger. In Psalms 20, verse 6, David says, now this I know, the Lord gives victory to his anointed. He answers him from his heavenly sanctuary with the victorious power of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. David is saying, we know that we cannot put our trust in military and the might. That's a misplaced trust. If we trust our military might, it may fail us. But when we place our trust in the Lord, he will never fail us. David understood that, but at some point, he forgot it. right? Had this great belief that he shouldn't place his trust anywhere except in God. But when he started counting his military might, where was he placing his trust? What was he trusting in then? You know, I like to give David the benefit of the doubt and believe that he really trusted God to provide. He believed that God would give him victory whenever he needed it, but he just wanted a little extra assurance. Here's a picture of Josephine actually letting me punch the third one, all right? She needed an extra layer of protection. She needed that really nice little rain parka. With that on, she trusted the science that the bag wouldn't leak. And I didn't show it, but the bag did not leak. It's still not leaking. So, maybe David just wanted that little extra layer of protection, right? Haven't you done the same thing? You know, we know, for instance, God has a financial plan for our lives, which includes giving, and giving generously, and giving sacrificially to God's kingdom. And yet, many of us struggle with that because we look at our bills and our obligations and we say, I can't give what I know I need to give because I can't meet my financial obligations. Or what if something happens and I need some money, to get out of a situation? An emergency might arise. And so we want some extra protection. We want some assurances. And we fail to fully trust God. Perhaps some of you younger people have been moved by these testimonies we've heard over the last few weeks of these people, these missionaries, who have left their homes, left their families behind, gone off to another part of the world, trusting God to provide. And maybe you feel God calling you to do something like that, but you're just not sure you can do that until you first make sure you got income coming, you've got a place to stay. You want some extra layer of protection before you follow God in obedience. Unlike the disciples, remember when Jesus sent his disciples out to do mission work? He said, don't take any money with you. Don't take anything but the shoes on your feet and the shirt on your back. And learn, he said, to trust in God. As you serve him obediently, trust him to provide for you. Most of us really struggle with that, don't we? We want that extra layer of protection. We want that rain parka. There's another possibility. David may have failed in his trust to the Lord because he simply didn't see the need. Maybe David had grown so wealthy and so powerful that he thought, I can handle whatever comes up on my own. And he had his military counted so he could say to his neighbors around him and the nations around him, don't mess with me. I've got 1.15 million men who are going to hurt you if you try. You know, Jesus said it's difficult for wealthy people to come into the kingdom of God. And I think this is one of the reasons why. Because when we grow wealthy and powerful, we tend to depend on that. We tend to think, I have the resources and I don't need to trust in the Lord. I can take care of this myself. And I'm sure some of us have had that issue in our own lives. Something comes up, and rather than turning to the Lord and saying, what should I do? I can take care of this. I can handle it. I've got the resources. I've got the ability. I'll just do it. And I guarantee you, when you place your trust in yourself, that is very, very misplaced trust. Whatever the reason, David decided to make this census. He failed to trust the Lord. Proverbs 3:5 tells us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. David was leaning on his own understanding. Josephine, when she put the parka on, she was leaning on her own understanding, failing to trust the Lord wholly. David insisted, in spite of Joab's concerns. Joab even said that God will provide what you need. He said, don't bring this guilt on Israel. But David insisted, and Joab obeyed. So see what happens with Joab in verse 6. Joab did not include Levi and Benjamin in the numbering because the king's command was repulsive to him. So Joab spent several months counting people, 1.15 million people, but then he never finished the census because he just got sickened by the whole thing. He comes back to David and he says, I'm done. Not going to do this. The tribes of Levi and Benjamin are not counted. Here's what we got. You want the rest of it? You're on your own. David saw that revulsion in his uncle and his general, Joab. And then we read in verse 8 that this command was also evil in the sight of God. So he punished Israel. And maybe it was when David finally saw the revulsion in Joab that he realized what he had done was sinful. So in verse 8 he confessed. He says, I have sinned greatly by doing this. Now I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I have done a very foolish thing. Well, good for David, right? He figured it out. He made a mistake. He misplaced his trust in something other than the Lord. He confessed it. He turned from it. He repented from it. And he asked for God's forgiveness. And God forgave him. But as we learned from Pastor Dave's sermon several weeks ago, part of the process of repentance is to accept the consequences of your sin. David had consequences that had to be paid. God sent the prophet Dan to tell him. Dan said, David, God has given you 3 choices. You're going to pay the consequences for your failure to trust fully in me, but it's going to cost you. And that those consequences are your choice. You can have 3 years of famine. You can have 3 months of being routed by your enemies, or you can have 3 days of plague in Israel. How do you make a choice like that? How did David make a choice like that? You know, when I was a teenager, I'll confess to you, when I was in high school, I spent more than one time in my vice principal's office for disciplinary reasons. Every time he gave me a very similar choice. He said, David, you can have 3 licks from my paddle, and he had a nice, good-sized wooden paddle. Back in those days, that was legal, all right? So you can have 3 licks from my paddle or 3 hours of detention. I always chose the paddle because it was short and quick, and it got over with, and my time was important to me. I didn't want to spend 3 hours in detention. That would be worse than dealing with the pain. So I chose the paddle. Well, David chose the shortest, but not for the same reason. He had a much better reason. We read about it in 1 Chronicles 21:13. He chose the 3 days of plague. And David said to Gad, I am in deep distress. Let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is very great. But do not let me fall into human hands. See, David had learned his lesson about trust. Think about it. If he had chosen 3 years of famine, there would be the temptation to go to his neighboring kingdoms and ask for help, maybe a trade agreement. Maybe we can send some of those million men to fight for you if you can help feed us. There would be that temptation to not trust the Lord. If he had chosen the 3 months of fleeing from his enemies, same kind of thing. He might have been tempted to make alliances to get help, to make a peace accord with the enemy that he's fighting against. But instead he says, I'm going to fall completely into the hands of the Lord and trust him for his mercy. You see, with the plague, he can't turn to anybody for help except for God. He placed his trust fully in the Lord. He got into this mess because of a failure to trust fully in the Lord, and now he's going to get out of it by trusting God. No raincoats, no extra layers of protection, no depending upon my own abilities or wealth or power. I'm going to just trust God. And as it turned out, he made the wise choice. Verse 14. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel fell dead, and God sent an angel to destroy Jerusalem. But as the angel was doing so, the Lord saw it and relented concerning the disaster, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, enough, withdraw your hand. David trusted in God's mercy, and God provided. He didn't receive the full punishment because God was merciful on him. So what's the lesson from this story? You know, I'm picking on Dave Brown a lot today, I guess, but you know, he's made it clear how effective a 3-point sermon is, right? When I was in seminary, it's 3 points in a poem. You had to end with a poem. But irregardless of that, there have been several sermons that had 5 or 6 points, right? Well, I'm not going to do 3 points. I'm not going to do 5 or 6 points. I'm going to give you 1 point. This is a 1-point sermon, all right? Josephine's going to help us see what that point is.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5.
There it is. Stop adding extra layers of protection. Stop depending upon your own abilities and your own resources. Stop thinking that you can handle this problem on your own. Stop looking for other solutions other than simply trusting the Lord. Just trust the Lord, right? That's the point. Just trust the Lord. Say it with me. Just trust the Lord. Good. Say it like you mean it. Just trust the Lord. When the doctor comes to you and he says to you, I think you may have cancer, what are you going to do? Yeah, okay. Hope you do it better than that. Some of you are getting ready to send your 18-year-old child off to college here in another few weeks, and it's a little scary because you know that 18-year-old is really totally unprepared for an adult world. So what are you going to do? Trust the Lord. When you get a call from your loved one that says, I'm sick, I may be dying, and they live in another part of the country, you want to be there with them, but you can't because you've got responsibilities here. What are you going to do? Just trust the Lord. He will not fail you. He will never fail you.